Hello everyone and welcome to the 2:30 p.m. session in the Developer and Open Source Track. As a reminder to our in-world and web audience, you can view the full conference schedule at conference.opensimulator.org and tweet your questions or comments to at OpenSimCC with the hashtag OSCC14 ! Because this is exciting. This hour, we are happy to introduce a terrific session called The Hypergrid, Online Identity and Virtual Assets in a Federation of Virtual Worlds. Our speaker today is Crista Lopes. Crista is a professor in the School of Information and Computer Sciences at the University of California, Irvine. Prior to being in academia, she worked at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. She's the co-inventor of aspect-oriented programming. She also serves on the board of the Overte Foundation and is the creator of the Hypergrid protocol, which allows avatars to travel between Hypergrid-enabled OpenSimulator grids. Welcome all. Let's begin the session.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm going to continue assuming that you can hear me. Justin asked me to come and give a talk about the Hypergrid, and I realized that I never really talked much about the Hypergrid, the technicalities of Hypergrid, beyond the IRC, the very detailed technical conversations that we have there. So I thought it would be a good idea to come and just tell you some of the technical aspects of it and answer some questions that you may have. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. So what is the Hypergrid? It's a federation protocol, and the word federation is used pervasively. There are other kinds of federations. It's a well-known concept in computers. It's basically a set of peers working that are each one is independent, but they are able to interoperate in some fashion. So the Hypergrid is one of those too. And the way that is implemented is implemented as a set of optional services in OpenSim that allow you to do the things that you like to do, like teleporting to other worlds and accessing your inventory and preserve your appearance as you go travel around. So the slide that I have there, and I apologize, I think some of my figures are going to be really hard to see if you just have the default camera as you sit down. So if you know how to zoom in, some of these pictures you probably want to zoom into the slide to see it a little better. What I have here is a sort of a bird's eye view of the architecture of both an OpenSimulator virtual world and the components for the Hypergrid. So everything in sort of bluish is the OpenSim virtual world, and the parts in green are the components that that world needs to provide in order to join the federation of virtual worlds. So when we start from the top, what you have on top is sort of what's exposed. Well, what you have on the edges is the things that are exposed to the wider internet. So you have the login service that's exposed, that's how people log in. And you have all those S's are the simulators, the simulator servers. You can have one or many if you have a grid. And then all of those servers, the login server and the simulators, they all kind of are connected somehow, either they're in the same LAN in the data center, or they are in the same computer, or they may actually be on different servers on the internet, but they share the knowledge of each other, and they also share a set of common services that's where the data gets stored. So things like user accounts, the assets, the inventory storage, the avatar storage, and many other services. So all of that in bluish means that's what you have in a virtual world as a unit. Actually this architecture is very nice. So the idea is that what you expose to the outside, if you ignore the green parts, what you expose to the outside is the ability for people to log in and the ability for people to connect to the simulators, which are the ones that serve these nice 3D scenes. But the backend is all hidden, and it's supposed to be protected. It's not supposed to be exposed on the internet. So you're not supposed to have your avatar, the people's inventories. It's not exposed on the internet in principle. That's an internal matter. So it's internal. It's a set of services that are shared by the simulators, but not by the wide internet. And that's basically a very nice design. That's perfectly fine. And if we want to make a federation, then we need to think a little bit harder about how to do this, because the first thing that I did when I started kind of experimenting with the hypergrid was to pull, for example, the inventory service and pull it out on the internet, right? You just pull it up and expose it, and now as you go around, you are able to access the person's inventory. Now that's extremely insecure, because then you expose the inventory service on the internet, and then the other servers that know about it can do all sorts of damage to the person's inventory. So that's not good. So the idea, as we started kind of learning more and more about what we could do with the viewer and what we could not, especially what we could not do with the viewer. And as I said this morning, for the most part of the project so far, we have assumed that we would not touch the viewer. We would just take the viewer as it was. So as we learn more about kind of the limits of the viewer, then we started to come up with alternatives for how to do a federation while keeping things secure and keeping the viewer as it was. So the architecture that emerged was these additional green services that are basically, starting from the bottom left, you have another asset service and another inventory service and another instant messaging service. Basically, you have replicas of the main services, but these are special ones. They are not they don't serve everything. They are restrictive. So what they serve depends on the kinds of policies that you want to abide by. So I will talk a little bit more about each one of those, but that's the general idea. And then on the right side of the slide, those are the bigger services. These are new services, the gatekeeper and the user agent service. They don't exist in a single virtual world. Those are there to serve. So the one on the top, the gatekeeper, are there to serve the world itself. So it's where you put policies for, if somebody wants to come and visit your world, there are a set of policies that they all go through that gatekeeper. That's sort of the entry point to a virtual world from the outside, from other virtual worlds. The other service on the bottom, the user agents, is regarding people. So the one on top is regarding the space. The one on the bottom is regarding people. And that one has policies for a domain of users. So basically, if your world lets your users go out, that user agent services is the service that rules, how people go out, where can they go. It's the one that confirms the identity when somebody else wants to make sure that the people are who they say they are. So that's related to users. So that's sort of the overall architecture of the hypergrid. It's basically those additional green services that you can turn on your usually only blue virtual world. So when you put many of these together, then you have a federation of virtual worlds, and the idea is that the viewers, the programs driven by the people interact with the blue parts that are exposed on the internet, so the simulators and the login service and whatnot. And the green parts are really for peer, but I won't say peer-to-peer, it's a bit misleading, but world-to-world communication, world-to-world interchanges. So the green parts are available for other worlds to invoke. And that's sort of where I'm going to explain a little bit more. Okay, so the history, just a little bit of history here. When I started experimenting with this, that's exactly what I did. I just pulled those services and put them outside and kind of explore that was obviously not viable. I mean, it's possible, but it was extremely insecure. There was no security. So then we went a little bit to the next one, which at least guaranteed that the people were authenticated. So if you presented yourself in another world and you say that you are from Nile@ics.uci.edu, then you really are from Nile@ics.uci.edu and not, somebody trying to spoof me. And then Hypergrid 2.0, which is what we currently have, then it went a little bit further on securing the inventory, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and the constraints that we were working with. There's some initial access control for assets, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done there, and I really haven't had any time to do that kind of work. So what I want to talk about next is I'll talk mostly about identity. I'll talk about inventory, a little bit about the assets, and then I'll talk about social network and instant messaging. And I'll go over some of the sequence diagrams that the protocol that is used in order for this to work. So let me start with identity. Now, I am a big believer of decentralization. I do not believe in the need for centralized services. I think it's just a horrible idea in any situation. Okay, I can say that because I'm in a university and I don't have any financial interests on any of this stuff. So I can say that it's just a bad idea. So I don't think we need centralized authorities for identity. I think it's perfectly feasible. In fact, that's how the hypergrid works, that we have a completely decentralized identities. And the way that it works is that it's basically DNS-based. We already have on the internet a way of naming things with some level of security, not entirely, because people can spoof DNS entries. We know that, but as much security as the DNS is, and that's sort of how the internet lives on, the identity on the virtual worlds is also secure. So basically, where's your identity? Who is your certificate authority? Well, it's whatever domain name and port you come from. That's it. So if I come from Nile@ics.uci.edu, that's my origin. And you come from osgrid.org, and that's your. If you come from kitely.com, that's your origin. We already have a naming scheme on the internet. We don't need another one. So that's sort of my principle here. DNS is perfectly fine. It's a wonderful, absolutely wonderful, fantastic, amazing system that doesn't get praised as much as it should because it's really amazing. Now, the question is, how do you authenticate? So even if you have, if you use DNS-based identity, you need to be able to authenticate things. So, if somebody comes here to this grid and presents themselves as being from Nile@ics.uci.edu, we should make sure that they are really from UCI.edu. And not spoofing, some malicious person coming and pretending to be from UCI, being affiliated with UCI. So this is sort of a fundamental element here of federation, is that identity needs to be secure. You cannot, it has to be very hard to steal people's identity. And so there are, when I was designing this back a few years ago, this is also at the hype and the peak of OpenID and OAuth and all of those kind of cool kids on the web. And there's actually a lot of, even on the IRC when we were discussing this, there was some pressure to kind of go in that direction, to use, OpenID and maybe OAuth and whatnot. And I was a little bit reluctant to do that. And I'm very happy that I didn't follow that route, to tell you the truth. As far as I can tell now, 5 years later, a lot of people who were using OpenID and OAuth are actually getting away from it, because it turns out that some of those protocols are actually quite fragile, and it's a headache to kind of keep up with what some of these service providers do, the changes that they make to the protocol and the data that they give. I'm very glad. And another thing that is used very often to, and in fact, OAuth relies on that to some extent, is some sort of a public key infrastructure. So private public keys that uniquely identify people, and you can authenticate. You can authenticate things. That's how a lot of authentication is done on the internet. I was also a little bit reluctant to use it, mostly because I have, again, an aversion for centralized services. And now that I'm working on the viewer, I find myself having to buy a certificate for signing code from a certificate authority. And I confess that I have this kind of I don't want to do that. For a number of reasons, because who are these certificate authorities that have more authority than somebody else to certify me? It's just like, and plus I have you need to pay $170 now. Maybe you need to pay $270 next year. Who knows? So I know this is completely against the mainstream of authentication and security that's going on, but that's just like, I just don't like it very much. So one thing that we did was actually to come up with a very, very simple mechanism, a very simple protocol for authentication that is absolutely as secure as DNS is secure, which is basically just a callback. So if somebody comes here and says that it's from Nile ICS-UCI-EDU, then what this world is going to do is actually to call back the UCI server with the data that the avatar is presenting here and confirm, hey, is it true that you have this person coming from this IP address with these service keys and whatnot? And the server at UCI will be able to confirm or not that there is indeed that session going on. So it's a very simple protocol. It's just a callback. There are other systems out there that do these kinds of things. It's not something that I invented. There are other systems that do that. And it's just a very low overhead, low cost. You don't need to pay anything to any certificate authority, and you get the authentication guarantee. So it's basically via a callback. And so the next slide that I'm going to present you, this is the one that you may really want to zoom in, because it's just impossible to read unless you are really zoomed in. So what this slide shows is the sequence diagram of what happens when a user in some region, in some grid 1, wants to teleport to some other region in some other grid. Okay, so this is a hypergrid teleport. So I'll start from the top left corner of the slide, and I'll work my way, from left to right and bottom to down. So the viewer sends a request to teleport, and this is on the person is in region A in grid 1, and so the region realizes that that this viewer may be a local viewer, a local user, or an hypergrid user. It doesn't matter. What the region is going to do is to contact. So the region knows that this is an hypergrid teleport. It's not a local teleport. So what it's going to do is to contact back the user agent service, one of those key green pieces that I talked about, and say, hey, your user wants to go to this destination. Okay, and then from then on is the user agent service that kind of takes control of the transfer. So what this is going to do is it's going to contact the gatekeeper of the destination grid, saying, hey, create an agent there, please. And then the gatekeeper is going to first verify that indeed this request has come from this request has come from the user agent service and not from some other spoofing requests somewhere on the internet. So there's a verification in there. Say, okay, it was successful, great. So then the gatekeeper of the destination world is going to create an agent, basically log in the agent into the local virtual world, including creating the agent in the region, the destination region. And once that's successful, then the gatekeeper of the destination sends back the reply to the user agent service of the user saying, great, you're done. And then finally, the region, the departing region, just sends the signal to the viewer saying, okay, go, teleport, finish. But that's not all, because this is not all, because this would still be able to, there would still be an opportunity for spoofing here. So what happens then is that at the region itself, the target region that receives the agent needs to be able to confirm then that the agent that is coming into the region is indeed the agent that it says that it is. So on the first contact of over TCP, basically, which is a CAPS seed request, when that happens from the viewer to the region, then the region contacts the user agent service and asks it basically, hey, do you really have a user with this IP address that's logged in and with this session number and some other information that is coming that wants to come to me? And the user agent service says, yes, I do. Okay, great. So then the region is relieved that it has the right agent and it lets the person logs in. So that's sort of how the Hypergrid Teleport works. I'll be happy to answer questions maybe at the end of the talk. Okay, so now let me talk about inventory. And inventory, the design of inventory services on the Hypergrid has been an exercise in sticking and kind of honoring constraints and going around them the whole time. So the way that it works is that the viewer contacts, so the way that the viewer works for inventory is that all inventory requests go through the simulator. So if you want to access your inventory, that request from the viewer first goes to the simulator, and then it's the simulator that sends a request to the backend server, inventory service, and fetches the inventory data and sends it back to the viewer. So that's how the viewer was designed. And again, as I said, a lot of what we've done so far in OpenSim has been under the assumption that we could not modify, we didn't want to modify the viewer. So how do you do this? Because obviously this is very insecure, because in a single world scenario, then this is perfectly fine, right? There's trust between the simulator and the inventory service, so there's nothing could go wrong in here. So the single world, that's a perfectly fine architecture. For a multiple worlds, obviously this is not a good architecture, because there is no trust between the foreign simulator where the user is and the user's inventory. So the foreign simulator could do all sorts of bad things, like deleting the user's inventory entirely, which was something that I kind of did once. I put up a simulator in OSCC at some point, kind of, almost deleting people's inventory, but not quite, just warning them, hey, I could delete your inventory if I wanted, but I'm not deleting. So this doesn't work. So how are we going to solve the problem without changing the viewer? So if we wanted to change the viewer, the right way of doing this would be, okay, so that idea of relaying all inventory requests through the simulator is really broken. What we really want is to just have the viewer access the inventory directly, right? You, like a client server, you just, it's the person is using the client and is accessing the inventory, just let the viewer go straight to the inventory service. And in the beginning there's a little login protocol that happens, and from then on it's sort of an authenticated calls, and that's how it should be done. But since we were doing, as I said, and since we were designing under the constraint that we were not going to make any changes in the viewer, then the ideal solution was not gonna work. So we had to fall to plan B. So plan B is that, again, it's this idea that there is no trust between the foreign simulator and the user's inventory. So what we're going to do is that we're going to, instead of serving on the internet the entire user's inventory, we're only going to serve a tiny portion of the user's inventory. And in fact, that's what we decided to create this concept of a suitcase, which is just one of the folders in your inventory. And it's a folder that is basically exposed to the internet. So bad things, your suitcase can be stolen, but it's guaranteed that it's only your suitcase. Nothing else in your inventory is accessible on the internet. And so that basically sort of it's a workaround on the fact that we didn't want to change the viewer. And so what we end up having when you have an hypergrid-enabled virtual world is that you have actually two inventory services. One is to serve the simulators, which is the one on the bottom of this picture. So one is, and it's supposed to be firewalled. It's not accessible on the internet, and there is trust between the simulators and that inventory service. And then there's another inventory service, which is the suitcase inventory service that only serves the suitcase folder, and this one is for all the other simulators in the world to access. So, and they both feed off data from the same database, because they are, internally they can access the same MySQL database or whatever database, but what they expose to the internet is something different. So one is actually firewalled, the one on the bottom, but serves everything of the user's inventory to the simulators that are inside the same domain of trust, and the suitcase inventory service is exposed on the internet, but it only serves the suitcase folders of the users. So that's how we went around. Now, there's a little detail, though, that I'm actually not telling the complete story, because if we would do that, then we would be in trouble with avatar appearance, because the way that the viewer works, the way that the system works, again, is one of the things that we didn't want to change, is that the appearance is very tightly coupled with information that's your inventory. So it's items that are in your inventory, your hair or your clothes or something, they are in your inventory. And in order, when you go and teleport to a different region, that region needs to have access to all of those items in order to, res you in a way. So those items need to be available. No, it's your own. So it's only your own. This is only your own appearance. So, but your own appearance needs to be available to the simulators that you visit. Otherwise, you get a roofed or a cloud appearance. So a little caveat here is that the suitcase inventory service serves not only what's on your suitcase folder, but also the items that you are wearing currently. Okay, so it's the only exceptions to the suitcase is only the suitcase is the appearance items. So your appearance items may be not in your suitcase folder, but they are also available through the suitcase inventory service. But I know that even so, there are some grids that are the avatars, appearances, and skins and all that stuff. They are very valuable, and they don't want to let them go out in any way, shape, or form. So there are ways of controlling this. There's, as usual, OpenSimulator is a marvel of configuration options. So one of the options, so the default is that we let the appearance assets go, but there is a configuration that you can prevent the appearance assets from going. And what happens is that you block. If somebody tries to teleport using just whatever they are wearing, that teleport is blocked. But what happens? You can configure the simulator so that people can just manually change to an appearance that you allow them to use. There's by configuration there's a number of appearances that maybe an astronaut suit or something like that. People have to wear that in order to go outside. So that's one thing that. Pardon me, that is already available in the regular OpenSim configurations. Okay. So yes, so I was going to talk about assets, but I think I'm going to skip ahead because assets is a big issue, and it's really not. The story is not complete yet. There are more things that we need to do in order to protect assets. So what I'm going to talk instead is show you one of these more funky sequence diagrams of what happens, so that this is for geeking out, for those of you who want to geek out. Here's what happens when you try to make friends over the hypergrid. So again, the Hypergrid Friends is one of the, it's a green service that sits outside of the firewall. It does not replicate everything that the blue one does. It does the same thing, but in a slightly different way. So for example, if you are here, as I said, you are here in this grid, and you come from your own grid, and you meet somebody here that comes from their own grid, and you want to make friends. So one of you, say you're calling Alice, okay? So Alice sends a friend request to Bob, and that request, the first point of the first reception is going to be this simulator where we are right here. So this simulator sends that request to Bob's viewer, and then Bob says, okay, great, I approve the friendship. And now this simulator is going to test, oh, okay, so where are these people from? Are they local users? Are they foreign users? So when it detects that they are foreign users, then this simulator is going to it's going to store this friendship not here in this world, because this world has nothing to do with these people friendships. It's going to contact the origin worlds of these two people and tell them about this friendship. And so this is sort of understandable. The whole difficult thing here is, again, security, because you could imagine that, some agent out there on the internet could just basically disseminate false friendships all over the place. You just say, okay, oh, this person is friends with that person, and this person is friends with that person. Of course, we cannot trust that, obviously. So the information is being sent from this simulator to the people's home worlds, and there's some codes and stuff that get sent around, but there needs to be a confirmation by the person themselves. So when you accept a Hypergrid friendship, there's a first confirmation here. Wherever you do the friendship, you ask to confirm. But then when both of these people go to their own worlds, and the next time that they log in, so the friendship is not really active until the next time that they log in. It's only on the next time that they log in that they receive a pop-up for confirming that they indeed are friends with that person. And so it requires the user to confirm again that indeed that friendship happened. Because we don't want to spam the friendship data with erroneous friendships. So that's basically what is going on here. And on the sort of the left bottom side of this slide is the part where the Alice, the Alice logs out, and then she logs in again, and that's when there's the extra little protocol for confirming that the friendship happened. So that's HG Friends. Next one is for instant messaging. Instant messaging is also very fun. It's like chasing a mouse that's rapidly moving through the house. So if you're trying to instant message somebody in another domain, so first goes to that request first goes to the region where you are, and that region where you are needs to find out where the hell is the person that you're trying to contact. So if you say, I want to send an email message to somebody at osgrid.org, then what's going to happen is that the region is going to contact the osgrid.org instant messenger saying, hey, do you have that user over there? Is that really a user? And by the way, where is the user? Right? Where is the user? So you find out who is Bob and where Bob is, and then you send the instant messaging to the place wherever Bob is, and then you go from there. So the interesting thing about instant messaging is because people teleport around, there's a chance that when you send the message, the person is no longer there, or the information about where the person was is outdated. So you kind of have to chase it again and ask it again, see if you can find out where the person is, and so that's sort of how the rest of the protocol goes. So I am sort of getting to the end. This is the end, really, this black slide, and I'll be happy to answer questions here. Yes, so there's a question. That is why when you make a friend, you should always go home to confirm it? Yes, indeed. So when you make a friend over the Hypergrid, when you go home and log in, you have to actually, well, I think when you go home, you'll get the pop-up. Or if you log out and log in again, you'll get the pop-up. But you have to confirm it. If you get there and you say no, then that friendship never happened. It's not stored. Right. It gives you an extra time to think. Right. So here's the question that Justin asked. What if someone's hypergrid address changes? As I said, the hypergrid is designed over DNS. So if you as a person have many identities like we do in Google and Yahoo and whatnot, those are all different identities. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing that we can say that it's the same person. It's the same thing here. So if you create an account in your home world 1 and you create another account in your other world, those are two online identities. There's no way that we can, or I mean, there might be a way, but I don't think we want to connect that to real persons. So it's it really is sort of based on domain name. And what would happen to the web if suddenly Google would switch from being called google.com to being called googlefu.com, right? The whole world would break. So there's nothing we can do about that. The internet is designed over the idea of these domain names, and the domain names are unique, and they are different from each other. So Justin has a question about if a callback in the authorization part is not encrypted with a known certificate, isn't that vulnerable to the man-in-the-middle attack? Of course it is, yes. So I didn't talk about encryption. All of the stuff that's going on right now in OpenSimulator vanilla installations, nothing of it is encrypted, which obviously makes it prone to man-in-the-middle attacks. So if we want to do this the right way, we have to encrypt it, and that's But we can do encryption. Encryption and authentication are two different things, and we can do encryption without doing the authentication part, and vice versa. So that's definitely if you are running this and you really want to make sure that things are private, you should. There needs to be a way that I believe that we have some HTTPS support on OpenSim. I haven't actually used it, but it should be used. Yeah. Okay, so there's a question here. Can anything be done to create more user-friendly methods for hypergrid addresses? Yes. Yeah, so hypergrid addresses have been a sort of a work in progress. It started as a completely obtuse kind of sequence of characters with like the pipe character in the middle. And then I switched to being just a URL kind of deal, but it's not complete URL because you can add an extra string at the end to denote the region. So it's not very consistent. It would be nice to actually make it consistent. So I'm totally open to work on people with making this a little bit more consistent. So there's a question over here. What new features are currently being worked on for the Hypergrid 3? So the things that are missing in the Hypergrid really is the asset protection. Asset protections are not very well done. So there's some asset protection which consists in basically not serving the important assets. For example, there's a way that you can specify on the asset server that you expose on the internet that what kinds of assets do you want to serve. So you can let go, for example, textures, but you can say, oh, I'm not going to serve anything that's a script or anything that's a mesh. I'm not going to serve it. So, but that's sort of a kind of an all or nothing, a little bit radical, because what we really want is to be able to let the content creators, first of all, specify whether a certain asset that they create is shareable or not, is accessible or not, and even more having some control over who is trying to access the person, the person who access that asset. Does the person have the rights to access it or not? So that would be a nice thing to do, and that's not done yet. I'm sorry, I'm going here through the questions. What if you have more than one grid on the same domain, right? Right. Yes, and I see also here sometimes there's a repetition. The friends request never goes away. Every time that you log in, you get. I get that bug here on this grid. Every time that I log in on this grid, I see some old friend requests. I think there's a bug. It's not a design issue. It's a bug. It's a bug. Somebody needs to kind of remove that. Okay, so two questions. One is, are you working with people developing other protocols like the Red Matrix? No, I'm not. I don't think I've heard about Red Matrix, but I will Google it after this session. And the other one is for the Hypergrid and Diva Distro. You are the MVP of the year. Oh, this is not the question, sorry. Okay. All right. Any more questions? So the last thing that I want to just say, I know that we are, except for Justin, who does a great job at trying his best to document things on the wiki. Everybody else on the OpenSim developers does a completely sucky job at documenting. We don't document almost anything, and I want to apologize for that. But the fact of the matter is that we don't have time. I just don't have time. I do OpenSimulator sort of on my weekends and nights, on top of a very busy full-time research professor at the University of California. I just don't have time for a lot of things. I did write a documentation for the Hypergrid, which is sort of there. And, one of the reasons why I don't publicize it very often is that I know 2 months after I wrote that, there's already things that are slightly different. So I would have to go and update this damn document again. I didn't have time to do that. So take what's there as sort of a grain. It's not 100% correct, but it sort of documents the Hypergrid at a high level. Well, it's not that it's not that I don't like to document. I like to document. It's just that I don't have time. So, if I had time, it would definitely be something that would be worth doing, but I just don't have time. Yes, students.
Okay, well, I hate to cut this off, but thank you, Crista, for the terrific presentation. This concludes the first day of the second annual OpenSimulator Community Conference 2014. Though the conference programming has ended for the day, Littlefield Grid is hosting a social event this evening at 8 p.m. Pacific Time at the Speakeasy Dance Club. and we encourage our attendees in world and on the web to visit Littlefield for fun and post-conference discussions. You can Hypergrid Teleport to the event with your conference avatar, or for more information, see the conference program at conference.opensimulator.org. We'd like to thank our audience in world and on the web and our speakers, staff, and volunteers for a terrific first day of the conference. We'll begin tomorrow at 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time in the keynote regions with an exciting keynote address from Steve LaVale from Oculus Rift, who will talk about the race to bring virtual reality to a mainstream audience. We hope to see you all there.